Hello and welcome to the HaloTracks.org Top 5 Countdown. Some call me Jeff H3962, others call me Jefe, and I'll be guiding you through the many delicacies of creation forged throughout the month of August. This is a Top 5 Countdown, focused only on racetracks submitted to the HaloTracks.org gallery by our map makers. We're honored to have you all with us, and we really do hope that you enjoy the series. But without any further delay, let's go ahead and get this countdown started. At number 5, we have Stoney Creek by King Edward I. It's a 9 out of 1. This track was forged in response to Nuked Ice Cream's Sandstone Fresh Slate contest. And the goal of this contest was to quite literally take the original layout, the somewhat controversial Sandstone Slateway, and base a new track off of that layout. Stoney Creek gets high praise for its aesthetical appeal, which is something Edward has always had certain affinity for, and helps make this track 1-3-4-3. I'm not even going to finish that joke. I apologize for even attempting it. But anyway, adding to what I was saying previously, the start of this track isn't as chaotic as Sandstone. It's nowhere near it. You spawn with 4 tires on the ground. When you push forward on the thumbstick, you continue to have 4 tires on the ground, which is always very nice, especially if you're trying to make a track centered around a competitive environment. And this track, Stoney Creek, is very beautiful to look at, with the exception of when you go into the inside right here. In my opinion, this track loses a lot of its luster once you get into the Coliseum. But the rest of the track is very well forged. What Edward did with the layout is very intuitive. I like it a lot, and it earned the number 5 on our countdown. Check out his file share to download it. Verdant is a roller coaster track created by Frederick 11, and this one will grab our number 4 spot. Frederick is primarily a roller coaster forger, and he really has a knack for crafting interesting and creative layouts. Now, this may not be the most beautiful coaster you see in Halo 4, and by no means am I saying that this track is not pleasing to look at. But the way it races and the general kind of minimalist-esque approach to aesthetics is what earns it high marks here at HaloTracks. And the track itself isn't terribly difficult. In fact, I didn't have any issues racing this whatsoever. You can really keep the throttle pinned and you don't have to do any kind of safety braking unless you mess up. But there is one portion of the track that isn't that smooth, depending on how you take it. It's one of the turns coming up. If you take it high into the inside, you can get a weird bounce, and sometimes it can roll you off the track. It hasn't happened to me yet, but I've seen people doing it. It's this turn right here. So just be careful when you're going on that one. Keep the sticks as straight as possible. Don't try to do anything stupid, and you'll be perfectly fine. But for that to be the only issue about this track, the only issue that I could find, really speaks volumes to how good this track is. And you should definitely check it out if you're a roller coaster fan. And taking that number 3 spot is NPRMX. This is a nationals track, forged by Casselfied and MtnDewX97, and also doubled as their submission to the Courageous Co-Forge contest, which was a contest that paired 2 random attendees together. And the goal was for those 2 random people that may or may not have had creative differences to forge a track together. And what we got out of that contest, and the first one and in the one that just finished, were some really interesting tracks, and NPR is one of them. And Castle is the kind of guy that really will only forge, in his words, to shut the haters up. And Mountain Dew is also not really known too much as a forger, but they both have a high amount of skill and a high amount of knowledge when it comes to creating jumps and motocross style tracks in Halo 4. And NPR really shows off that skill. The only problem that I really have with this track is that tabletop jump right there. It can be a little bit random, and I feel that they could have done a little bit more with that section. But just like with Verdant, for that to be really the only gripe I have about this track implies that this is just a very well forged track. And if you enjoy nationals racing, if you enjoy, you know, this kind of competitive stuff, then NPR is the perfect track for you. And head to Casselfied or MtnDewX file share to see it. Alright guys, we're almost at the end, but before we get to numero uno, we must first take a look at numero dos. Stockholm RX is a rallycross track intended for competitive racing environments. Purple Dinosaur Zero and King Edward were able to put such a large focus into aesthetics on this track, primarily due to the track's length. Because it's only 23 seconds long on average, as you saw in the graphic, they were able to siphon off a large part of the forge budget into creating the scenery of this track, and look scenic it does. You go underneath this tunnel, then you go over the tunnel, and around this turn that takes a good amount of skill to do without stopping. The entire track is just forged around this big mountain that has this picnic area and this alpine feel with hotels around it, but it's on an island. The entire track just looks beautiful, and while because it's a competitive track, a lot of racers doing it in a squad like HT Rallycross might not be concerned about the way it looks. I still recommend, if you download it, and you should download it, to kind of stop and just smell the roses, because this track is beautiful, and I'm sure that there are aesthetics that they put on this that I haven't really seen that I'm not going to talk about yet. But like most rallycross tracks, it's not double wide. That's something that's a little unique to tournament tracks when they're the rallycross type. This is a really fun track. It looks great. I highly recommend it. Robbing the #1 spot, and a little surprise to some, is Whitewater National by King Edward I. His third track in this countdown, and Whitewater is one of the best nationals tracks you'll see in Halo 4. And it's nestled in the terrain portion of Ravine, which doesn't give you a whole lot of space to forge. And because of that, this track uses almost every square inch of space for its layout. The only part of the space that it does not use is the cave portion. And it wouldn't make sense for Edward to run a Nationals track layout through there, mostly because it's not double wide, and for tracks that are really jump centered, like Supercross and Nationals tracks, having it double wide is almost essential. In fact, it is essential to the track's flow and to making sure that things don't get too crazy and too hectic. But putting it mildly, this is just a stunning racetrack. Edward's really outdone himself on this one, and going back to the one line thing, it's something that Nationals tracks have traditionally suffered from, is that once one person finds this master line, any other line is basically worthless, because as a master line implies, that is the fastest line no matter what, and that can kind of destroy the flow of a Nationals track. But this track, you can take the inside, outside lines, the middle lines, if there is one. You can basically race this track how you want and have a shot at winning, no matter what line you take. And with this track, Edward only solidifies his already deified status over the motocross forging domain in Halo, and earns our #1 spot